I'll let Heavenly go first. I'll go last.
Welcome to Flatter Friday, Heavenly. This is your first stationary Saturday.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to ask Witsit if he could give me a quick summary of the reasons why the Michelson-Morley experiment, because usually the narrative is that it disproved the static ether, why it proves that the Earth is not in motion. Like a summary, because I didn't watch the last streams because I didn't have time. So in order to debate about it, I would like to have a summary of your position. I have read the paper, so there wouldn't be any problem if you use specific terminology. So
Yeah. All right. So they thought that the Earth was moving around the sun 30 kilometers a second. And so they predicted a fringe shift, right? Because obviously one light beam is moving with the Earth, one's not. They assumed an ether, assumed an orbital velocity of 30 kilometers a second. They got a null result. And so they either had to explain it away, right? Explain why you couldn't measure the Earth moving through space, or accept the result that the Earth was not moving through space. So obviously they went the route of trying to explain why it appeared as if the Earth was stationary. So what they did was got rid of the ether. So the paper will say we've disproved a stationary ether. But what happened is Einstein comes in and gets rid of the ether and then changes the orbit to a linear path. He called it a curvilinear path, meaning that it's going in a curved path and it's going straight at the same time. And it's free falling in that linear path through the bending and warping of space-time. So the interferometer couldn't detect it because it was actually going in a straight path while you're on the Earth. And time dilates and slows down, and the distance contracted. And so it created the illusion that the Earth was in the center. That's the official model's excuse. The problem is there actually was a fringe shift measured. It was just roughly 1/6 the predicted value. Now, what they said was that it was just instrumental error, right? Because they had to come in and say, oh, you can't detect the motion of the Earth from the Earth, right? Because the only other option is that the Earth is stationary. But again, it did detect some type of motion. It was nowhere near what they needed it to be. And then when it was replicated, it continued to detect some type of motion. And it was disproven that it was an error, simply instrumental error, because it consistently happened. And it happens based on direction, the actual direction that the test is performed in, and it changes with altitude and changes even in terms of periodicity of the sun and the moon and stuff. And so what it shows is that there is a fringe shift that is measured on the Earth in the Michelson-Morley or replications like Dayton-Miller and after that. But it can't be the Earth rotating because it has to be 30 kilometers a second. So just like Einstein himself said, if Dayton-Miller's results are confirmed, which was him just replicating and confirming Michelson-Morley's results, then my theory of relativity is wrong. So long story short, they used interferometry to measure the Earth moving through space. They did not get it. So then in order to try to keep their model alive, instead of accepting that it showed the Earth was stationary, they threw out the ether. They said time slows down and that matter contracts just the right amount to create the illusion that the Earth's not moving. And yeah, it's curving around the sun, but it's also going straight at the same time. So you can never detect the Earth moving from the Earth, and it'll always appear as if the Earth is at rest. Problem is that there was actually a measurement and it had been replicated multiple times. And that's what proves that the Earth is not moving through space. There's obviously a lot more to it because then you get into Michelson-Gell-Pearson in 1925 that then does actually measure a rotational displacement, which is a major problem when they were claiming that you couldn't, and then they do mental gymnastics to explain it away, blah, blah, blah. But long story short, yeah, it's just the interferometry was over 10 times more sensitive than it needed to be to measure the motion of the Earth, and it did not. And there you go.
yeah, I wanted to go through 2 points very quickly. First of all, I would like to ask you about the change in the ether drag, in this case would be, based upon elevation. I remember that Bob, I guess, talked about it in one of his videos, and he said something that you try to measure it, changing the elevation, and you got different results. I would like to ask you if you have any documented data related to those experiments that Bob made, And also, I would like to go more towards the point of just because it has direction, the error in question, it doesn't count as an error. Well, there are some occasions in physics in which you have a consistent error in terms of direction. For example, if you are trying to measure the force with which you are extending a spring, for example, obviously the direction of the error will be more biased towards the direction in which you're tensing the I don't remember the word that I used previously. Well, sorry, I'm not a native English speaker, so I don't remember the word.
Winding
was
it?
it? No.
Like the winding of the spring, the direction that goes?
The spring, sorry. Yeah. I don't know why I didn't remember the word. Well, when you pull the string back, the spring back, you are going to see a consistent error when you try to measure the force that was exerted upon the spring that goes towards the direction of the force itself. So in this case, you're going to have a persistent error, but it doesn't transmit any information about there being some kind of secondary thing acting upon the spring. So that
cool. All right, cool. I got you. So first thing with the Bob thing, apparently the data has been examined by my boy Stone really precisely, and they had it set up to take way too many measurements way too frequently, and it's basically impossible to sift through the data. And so then they were getting a much more generalized, inaccurate output for every part of it, even whenever it was allegedly 15 degrees. So they did show deviation like up to over a degree at different altitudes and stuff, but apparently whenever you intricately look at the data, they kind of set it up wrong where they made way too many measurements, overloaded the ability to get an accurate reading. So basically all of that data, every single bit of it's kind of a wash. The real evidence is the more valid and empirically verifiable tests that were done in like the 20th century or 21st century outside of Bob, right? There have been different tests by many people like Wang and different people.
Witsit, can I bring something up real quick about the Bob the elevation thing? So what they ended up doing was, as of getting those results, they ended up putting the fiber optic gyro in a vacuum chamber, and they got a lower value of Earth rate drift depending on as they lowered the pressure in the vacuum. So they put the fiber optic gyro in the vacuum chamber and lowered the pressure, and as they did this, and all this data used to be on YouTube channel, a guy named Rick Zimmerman. His YouTube channel was Seventh Day Truth Seeker, but he made some comments about, the pandemic and got his YouTube channel deleted. So there is a published paper, it's in Russian, unfortunately, where they actually observed this effect as well. So it isn't just like something that only Bob or Rick Zimmerman got out of it. So just to sum it up, they took the fiber optic because they did this because Bob lived in Colorado. So they figured, hey, maybe it's the air pressure, right, that changed the readout because they got a different result at a higher altitude than a lower altitude. So then they're like, let's just put it in the vacuum chamber and figure out what it is. And then when they did, they got a lower value. I just wanted to bring that up.
Nice. Yeah, dude, if you can send me that paper, actually, bro. I think the only problem is with Stone, you should look at Stone's breakdown if you haven't seen it. He really breaks down that they said it. I think they was
No, I haven't.
Yeah, they were trying to be over the top with how many measurements they got, but they set it up way, like to take way too frequent of measurements, and they overloaded any like realistic
so
computer.
Karen sent me the data way back, probably like way back when they did it, when like Tesla's Apple and like all those guys were involved, and like they were taking like measurements like every I don't remember, it was like once a minute or something. It was ridiculous. Like why are you pulling it that much? But
no, it's insane. It's insane. So it overloaded the system. Any like realistic ability to compute it in, but Stone did pretty good breaking it down and showed that it's basically it's a wash. But I will say, with the altitude relationship, like Galev did it, right? And there are different people who have done that. Galev did it 2002. And so there are things outside of like Bob that show that there's an altitude relationship that are much more precise, and even with like top level like Navy equipment. As for the second part the point you're making about like, oh, well, you can find error based on direction. In other terms of physics, you use a spring as an example. And you're like, okay, well, you'll find an error consistently based on the direction you pull the spring back. The reason that doesn't work, right? The reason that that's not relevant is because, yeah, if you pull the spring back over and over, there might be an error based on, say, like the base of the spring or whatever. If you turn that spring, say 90 degrees, right, the error will now be in a direction 90 degrees to the initial one, right? It won't only give you an error based on cardinal direction, but with these measurements, it changes with cardinal direction no matter which way you orientate the test. So like the actual rate of propagation of the light and the interference pattern you're getting is changing based on direction and altitude and periodicity of sun and moon. So it's not the same as like moving the spring in different directions, right? So that's why that's not the same. And also it wouldn't make sense for the error to just happen to correspond with altitude. So it can't be an error. And by the way, I mean, Einstein and similar proponents never even actually explained what the error supposedly would be. And every time people came up with one, like, oh, maybe it was temperature fluctuations, whatever, Dayton Miller would go test that variable. For example, with temperature, he put radiant heat sources right by the test and measured the differences to prove it wasn't actually temperature fluctuations causing error. And so he refuted all of those things, and no one could rebut him while he was alive. Then he dies, and then they just completely straw man him and throw dirt on him and cherry pick his data and all this crazy stuff. So yeah, that's why that doesn't work. And then I would actually point to Galev for the altitude. I believe it was Galev that did it. But we can send you all the papers. There's a whole compilation of them.
Yeah, I have to analyze a lot of papers because I have to go through Alan and Toby's papers, and also have to go through presentations and all of that. If we take in consideration the amount of hours that it would take to do that, it's almost 200 hours, and that's a lot. And I don't have.
I get it, but did you get my point? Did you get my point with the error thing? Like, say if you have the spring and I pull it back east, right? So if I have the spring pointed to the east and I pull the spring back, yeah, I might keep getting an error, right, in that direction. If I turn it to the south, well, now I'm going to get the error south. If I then turn it west, I'll get it west. North, I'll get it north, right? But I'm not going to turn the spring from the east to the south and then keep getting the error in the eastern direction. I'm going to get it based on the actual orientation of the device. But this is showing that it doesn't matter which orientation the device has. You start getting the different readings based on cardinal direction. And there can't be an instrumental error that's consistently based on cardinal direction, right? That doesn't make any sense. Same way you couldn't have consistent instrumental error with altitude. It's not like the instrument is sentient and is conspiring to only show you an error whenever it's in a certain cardinal direction or at a certain altitude, right? So yeah, that's kind of the point. And then we accounted for the variables of temperature and pressure and showed that that is not what's causing it either. So yeah, it's rough. It also changes throughout the year, right? So it changes based on solar motion. So again, the instrument's not like, oh, let me just show errors that are a certain amount based on the equinoxes, right? It's like, no, there's some type of motion in relation to the sky and the solar motion in the sky and the periodicity, like the cycles of the sun and the moon, that these interferometry measurements are detecting and changing relative to solar motion, time of year, direction the sky moves, the path of the sun and the moon. And that is a direct refutation that you're detecting anything to do with the earth moving. And there's really no way around it. That's why they just have to say instrumental error, and then they can never rebut what I just said, because it's just game over at that point.
Yeah, I would like to have the experiments that you're talking about with more confounding variables, or well, independent variables that could change the result of the interferometry experiment. But because you need replicability for science in general, so it would be very good to have more of those experiments. And also, I wanted to address the thing about instrumental errors. You can have a form of instrumental error, and this does not depend upon if the Earth is flat or a globe, because this happens because of the magnetic field. In Cavendish's paper, if you go, I don't remember the exact page, but the original paper, he had to account for the balls of lead and the instrument that he was using to be in perpendicular to north and south, so that the balls themselves wouldn't polarize with the Earth's magnetic field and create an instrumental error in the vibrations that he would measure, because it wasn't completely static. The apparatus was not completely static, and in order to get out of this problem, he basically had to put the device perpendicular to a direction north and south, so that he wouldn't have this error of the balls acquiring the same charge as the Earth, and therefore changing the vibration of the balls because of magnetic effects. So you can have some sort of cardinal-based errors. Well, Cavendish have to account for them in that case, and well, that would be my point.
Okay, yeah, yeah, cool. Alan, go ahead.
Well, just to tell you, I posted that study, Witsit, in the Jumbotron, and linked to that Russian study.
Nice, thank you, brother.
Yeah, good luck trying. I mean, you can look at the graphs. I mean, that's easy enough, but I mean, good luck translating it to English.
Yeah, I'll do that maybe.
Yeah, cool. So to add a couple of things on there, if you don't mind, I put a link to Man of Stone's video where he does the analyzation of the data. So I highly recommend that. It's in the Jumbotron, so check that out. Shout out to Man of Stone. And then a couple other things. So regarding instrumental air and periodicity, so you got to remember too, with this instrumental air so-called, we're looking at a periodicity that matches sidereal time daily and annually, right? So when it'll reach minimum and maximum peaks on the equinoxes, right? So that's not, you can't wrap that up under instrumental air. And then on top of that, so Miller's device, his interferometer, now he could get it sensitive enough to measure down to the thousandths of a wavelength, but most of his measurements, and like actually pretty much all of them, all the published stuff is done in the hundredths of the wavelength. So it's well within the sensitivity of that apparatus. So he's got the periodicity measured in the hundredth of a wavelength, right? And then Gallup comes along with millimeter wave bands with radio interferometry, and he also does it with a laser. But so we got more precision, different wavelengths, and it's still producing the same periodicity that Miller measured. He actually measured it like pretty much 1-to-1. So there's and this is at like a different data point too, different altitude. So using his data, he was able to plot the vertical velocity gradient and how the increasing at altitude. So it takes away from the from the like whole thanks Bob thing, right? Because the causal mechanism in their paradigm is supposed to be a rotation with respect to a fixed point at the center of the Earth. So they can't have deviations at altitude or anything like that. So it shows that the cause is the sky, right? And then additionally, something really important in Michelson-Morley, not to be glossed over, is in the opener, right? He's talking about Aries failure, right? They call it, but it's actually Aries success, obviously. But what he says there is super important because he gives a little side note. And if you read that little side note, what he's talking about is the explanations that they gave for Aries failure. So I don't know if you've ever looked into the heliocentric explanations for Aries failure. They just say, oh, he failed to detect the ether, well, guess we'll try again with an interferometer. But anyway, what they had to do to rectify heliocentrism with Aries results was they had to say, okay, if you believe that light is a corpuscle and it's like a little ballistic projectile, then you have to believe that when the light hits the water, the light accelerates in the telescope, in the water, so that you don't have to make up the difference in the correction angle. And that's obviously untenable because that would violate their conservation laws. So on the other side of that now, remember they had a static ether theory. So the ether is immovable, but inside of the telescope, for some reason, the ether is mobile and bouncing around. So if you're a wave lad, you would have to say that the wave is being carried in the opposite direction of motion, which is obviously ridiculous and even worse than the other theory, right? Of the light accelerating. So that's super important to touch on, because at the end of the paper, he goes on to say, they actually never say that they falsify a static ether theory or anything like that. They say that the relative velocity of the Earth and the ether must be less than 1/6 of Earth's orbital velocity, like the assumed velocity of 30 kilometers a second, and certainly less than 1/4 of it, right? Because they measured, what was it, 5 to 6 kilometers a second, right? But then he goes on to say, he talks about Stokes and Fresnel's explanation of aberration. Now, what it's like, oh, what does that mean? Well, we just learned about the being carried in the opposite direction of motion to explain the null result and how that's not tenable. Well, those are the lads that proposed those explanations, Stokes and Fresnel. So he Michelson at the end of the paper saying that those aren't tenable positions, and even I think he touches on Lorentz's theory of contraction too, and he's like, yeah, I don't know about all that. Yeah, it says the Lorentz, the velocity potential in his theory also fails. So yeah, he knocks out all three potential explanations there, and that's very important to clarify that, because they did get a measurement, but it doesn't correspond to heliocentrism. And it's like, well, what do we do with this measurement? Do we throw out the measurement? Do we throw out the ether? Like, what do we do here? And then, do you have any questions before I continue? Because I took a couple of notes while you guys were talking.
Gary seems to think you are a comedian.
Who's that? Oh, I don't care. Did you have any questions?
Yeah, I had another question with your kinematic equivalence. I guess that you remember one of the videos that you uploaded a few days ago about the kinematic equivalence, and you basically made it so that you can describe these kinematics of the celestial bodies only based upon their periods, their orbital periods.
Oh, yes, yep.
Well, when you cancel the two masses at both sides of the equation, the masses must not be zero, because you cannot divide by zero in both parts of the equation. So how would you respond to that point in particular? Because that's basically saying that you require the two things that you're talking about to have mass in this case. Right.
So it's the important thing about that, the way that they derive it, is that the mass of the other object for the causal mechanism cancels out, and it's only about the constants. So they have their two constants established from Cavendish, right? Which could have given them anything, right? But they've, settled on what they needed to for their angle of deviation, and that's what they went with. So with that, they established the weight of the Earth, and then they had G, right? So then they just applied that to the periodicity of the sun. So when you do that, you can backwards derive what the weight of the sun would be, and then you could just start backwards applying it. You could just put the big M for the sun, and then start working out what the weight of the other planets would be in relation to the sun's mass, because you've already equated what it would be backwards from from an Earth observation. Is how they did it. So it's like it cancels out in a way that it's not the causal mechanism, but mathematically, like, it's still there, but obviously it's not related to the causal mechanism.
Yes, but in order to actually derive that explanation from the equations, you require the two things to have a mass. So if you go through...
okay, 1 second. So you could treat those as Gaussian surfaces, right? And just treat the mass as electric potential, and the big G would then be an electric field gradient. So it would be the same thing. And so, because it's just ratios based off of the constants. It doesn't matter that mass is in there. That number could be anything. It's going to output it proportional to that, because that's how the equations work. It's not designed to be an actual physical mechanism to be proportional to anything real. That's just what they've, how they're presenting it, right? And because you can backwards derive it with Kepler's, they're like, oh, look, it's super dynamic and mass attract mass. But that's obviously not the case, right? That was falsified with the perihelion precession. Because if you're going with gravity as the causal mechanism for the motion of celestial bodies with mass attracting mass, and you're in a perihelion orbit, you are 100% bound to that plane, and you cannot deviate. That's why they had to add further explanations and came up with general relativity, essentially. Like, that's why it was a big important thing, because they all understood the mechanics of that relationship, and they were like, well, this can't be happening, right? If it's mass attracting mass, because they already account for the perturbation of all the other planets in the solar system. So they got their gravitational tug of war, and they still couldn't solve the 43 arc seconds that was left over. That's why that's significant for them. Now, like, I think it's retarded, but for them, like, they were like, oh my God, this is untenable. So their mass attract mass relationship and their claim of dynamics of the skies being mass attracting mass is just kinematics. Right, because it's just constants in a ratio.
There you go. Yeah, I was going to say that word. It's just based on ratio. Although, Alan, real fast, and I'll give it back to that guy. Don't you think it's interesting that obviously you could actually explain it better in the form of like an electric gradient or some type of other causal mechanism other than what they imposed, right? Because they're like strictly limited to the mass relationship, giving them the plane of motion, whereas an alternative causal mechanism would have some type of like fluctuation that would be possible, you know?
Yep.
Anyway, sorry, did you get what he was saying, that it's just all based on a ratio?
Yeah, but I also wanted to ask you, because I didn't quite get the response that I wanted. I get that it was related to a ratio that didn't necessarily incorporate the masses, because if they weren't different to zero, they would end up canceling. So that wouldn't impact the result of the equation. But just because it's not dependent, you're right on that, does not mean that it does not necessitate the two objects having mass. And then goes the point that Gaussian superficies can be considered as mass. And I would like you to expand on that, because that's really weird, at least for me.
Yeah, so you could treat a Gaussian surface, right, and give it a equipotential charge distribution, right? You assume, by assuming a quote unquote Gaussian surface, right, you're giving it the conditions where you don't have to come up with a reason as to why the electric gradient is evenly distributed or anything like that. So you would just take whatever the mass would be, whatever that potential would be to generate that gravitational field to fit that potential for the periodicity of the event, right? It would just be based on charge potential. So it's within the Gaussian surface, and that would create an equipotential electrical field that would permeate as the big G in the equation based off of the charge potential instead of the mass. Right. So,
do you not see, actually, ironically, it's very low IQ what they did. They reverse engineered it and derive it from the kinematics, replace a variable and throw mass in there. So basically, in really simple terms, what they did was say, okay, let's just say that the ratio is based on how big things are. Just the size of them alone. Like, that was their genius. Yeah, that was their genius theory, was like everything moves because of how big they are. Or maybe it's something else, right? Like the magnetic properties, the electric properties of whatever they are, right? Like, it's what they came up with was so stupid and low IQ and overly simplified. It's wild that people think it was some like genius breakthrough.
Because they poison us with neurotoxins such as vaccines, fluoride,
hold on,
and our food.
Hold on a sec. So did you have any other questions? I'm sorry, I don't have your name. I can't see the thing. But did you have any?
Great. You can call me Great. I guess that was most of the things that I wanted to know, but also I would like to see more about these that you're talking about in relation to Gaussian superficies, because mass is an inherent concept, like a primitive concept that does not necessitate anything else, I would say, because mass, as originally described by Newton, didn't have anything to do with the matter of the objects, but it had to do with the opposition to movement. That's why F equals ma. The greater the mass, the less the acceleration of the object is going to be. So it's more related to resisting the force that you are imprinting upon an object. So I would like to see more about Gaussian superficies. If you have something in your Zotero library that I was searching for, but I found it in your Telegram, so that's good. And more about these Gaussian superficies in your YouTube channel or something from Stone's channel, it would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be in the section. I don't know if it's updated from when I debated McToon or not, but I added stuff from Edward Dowdy Jr. and I'll go ahead and send that to you on EtherCause. But yeah, using that kinematic assumption, right, of a Gaussian surface, he was able to backwards derive what's it called, the angles for gravitational lensing, right? So like the same exact mechanism, same exact equation, just literally changing it to a Gaussian surface, which, as I was saying earlier, that like gives them the equipotential field gradient, so it just simplifies the math for them. So instead of equating it to mass being the causal mechanism, it's just a field gradient of electric based off of the charge potential, which would be equivalent to the mass, because it's just like replacing it kinematically, right? So it's just like, oh, it has this much mass. It's like, okay, well now it has this much charge. Yeah, so it's like same thing. So I'll get this sent to you.
The only difference is that you could actually explain the differences in motion, bro. Like it's actually superior. If you invoke anything electric or magnetic for the motions, then it's like, oh, this doesn't perfectly fit within the predicted plane of motion based on the size. Okay, no big deal. It has a different charge, it has different magnetic properties. But if you say it's just based on the size, then you're limited to a very specific plane of motion. And that's why they ran into a huge problem with perihelion shift. And actually, it's still a problem, right? But they just teach the layman stupid propaganda like, oh, just repeat how small it is off over a long period of time, and that'll suffice to get rid of it. It's like, no, you don't understand how dynamics works. Like, you see my point? Again, like, our position is always going to be superior in every single way because we're not limited to proportionate mass.
Yeah, I will try to see if I can arrive to that conclusion after analyzing all of the data. I have to analyze a lot of data, so it would.
No, you're cool, man. If you seem like you're just a flat earther in the making, my brother, I'll be real with you.
Yeah, no worries, bro. It's no problem that you have questions or contentions or anything like that. And you're welcome on the Discord. I don't know if you have the link, but you're welcome anytime to pop in. You know, we host pretty much every day of the week. But yeah, you're welcome to pull up, man, and ask questions.
Yeah, that's also something that I wanted to ask you. How do you manage to do these streams all of the days of the week? I literally don't have like even 2 hours to watch your stream, so it amazes me that you can stream literally every single day from the week.
Takes quite a commitment, I'll say, but you know, it's all good.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I will analyze all of the data and then we will see if we can debate more about it.
Awesome, dude. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Well, every time I see somebody like that guy that's like really into the info and wants to like honestly figure out what's going on, it's like, oh, you're welcome to the club.
Dude, yeah, he already understands like so much of it. It's just once he sees it in their writing, he's gonna be like, oh shit.
Yeah, and that's basically what I want to analyze the things. I already have some background knowledge about the scientific method, if you want to debate about that in some occasion. So that's something in which I am most specialized in. So like induction, deduction, logic, all of that. There wouldn't be any problem if we debate something like that. But yeah, I will look forward for the papers and then analyze them.
Yeah, man, and pop in the Discord. We can just stay cool with them when you're cool with us, man.
Yeah, well.
Hey, bro, shout out to you for like doing your own due diligence, for actually looking at the information yourself. That's why they're saying, like, you know, eventually you're going to see what we're talking about, because people with that type of focus and the approach to that information is usually the ones that discover the truth. So shout out to you. Did we even ask Heavenly, like, what did he believe in?
I think it's pretty safe to say he currently kind of leans towards the globe, right? And he's trying to look into our arguments further to either be able to debunk them or find out that they can't be debunked. I mean, I'm not going to fully speak for him, but I'm pretty safe in my assumption, I think. Heavenly, you wanna answer for yourself, man? Like, are you on the fence? Are you like a globe lad, just kind of interested in our arguments, figuring out what's wrong with them? Or...
Yeah, I'm currently more on the globe side, but I am perfectly able to change if I see evidence that contradicts what I say, but it must be very consistent evidence and a lot of it. So after analyzing all of the data, which is a lot, like 200 hours worth of data, I will say my conclusion, and otherwise I will come here to debate.
No, you're cool. He's on the fence. Hey, what I will tell you, man, a good little intro. I'm going to plug my boy Genesis here. If you haven't seen it and you're maybe new to the idea, you should pop up The Principle. You should watch The Principle. It should be a mandatory homework assignment for anyone that's getting into this conversation. And that'll kind of give you a lot of, you may be familiar with all of that anyway, but The Principle is a very telling documentary. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth the hour and a half, whatever.
Yeah, what's its name? Sorry,
it's Principle. Called The Principle. PRINCIPLE. The Principle. Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Such a great movie with Jim Belushi. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you'll see it's a documentary, and it's by Robert Sungenis. It's got a bunch of really big astronomers, astrophysicists, and physicists in it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I've seen some things about Robert Sungenis, and also I saw that there was a book that he was talking about geocentrism that was responded to by some other flat earther. That I have the book right here, and I will look forward to read about it. So yeah, I know about most of the people that I have to search about. I have more than 100 names on my list. So
word, yeah, just don't even worry about like if you look stuff up about him, you'll see all kinds of ways to discredit him. But the main guy he worked with was Robert Bennett, who's actually been on my show, a couple interviews. He's been in the Discord with us. He's a PhD physicist who wrote his thesis on the motion of rigid bodies and relativity. That's what he wrote his PhD thesis on, and he helped Sungenis with a lot of the work, a lot of the math, a lot of the physics. And anyway, I mean, we don't even agree with him, right? Like he isn't a flat earther, but I've also had him on my show. But the point is, it's just the information. It's not really about who gives it to us, right? Yeah. Also, I mean, while we're plugging documentaries, for anyone that's listening and hasn't seen these, it's like requirement, in my opinion, The Principle and Heliosorcery. And those two documentaries are really going to lay out the science or the scientism and the history that has gotten us here. And regardless of what you believe, right, it's good for everyone to just like be informed on what got us here. And if you watch those two documentaries, you'll have a pretty good introductory grasp.
Hey, Austin, if you wouldn't mind, what years were those documentaries made?
So The Principle is actually older, I think 2014, but still very pertinent. And
wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, and then Heliosorcery is maybe 2 years old now. And that's on YouTube. It got like about 300K and then got clearly, stopped. That's much more of like the history of heliocentrism, the progression of it, who came up with it. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like they were literally sun worshipers and all these crazy occultic beliefs, and it goes through like the whole process of that. And then The Principle breaks down a lot of misconceptions. Like Sungenis is a legend, right? So he's been looking into geocentrism since 2002. Then he made the documentary in 2014, and he found out that the publication of the Principia by Isaac Newton, it had a final page on it that talked about, but the Earth could be in the center of the universe and stationary. So basically, he writes all this stuff about gravity and the Earth moving through space and stuff. And then at the very end, he says, with all that being said, the Earth could be stationary, like with the face. That
was the caveat, right?
Yeah, and so what they did was take that page off and then publish it. They took that page out of it, and he found it. And he also found a letter from Galileo where he denounced heliocentrism before he died that was hidden. And he found a lot of documents that have been suppressed to lie about what really happened. So
does he explain how he found Newton's page that was
written? He worked with a professor who was like studying the life of Newton and found it.
No shit.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they acknowledge it as legitimate now, right? So
yeah, they can't refute it, right?
Yeah.
Once it's out in the open. Wow.
Nothing sketchy about taking that page out before you publish it, though,
Nothing. No. You don't need to know that, pleb.
I trust the editors.
Appreciate it, brother.
Yeah. Jesus said, beware of the scribes, bro. Show up.
Also, Witsit, do you have the papers about neo-Kantian systems that you were talking about in one of your streams?
Neo-Tychonian.
Oh,
Yeah.
Neo-Tychonian, sorry.
Yo, I'm about to put a link up in the Jumbo, and I'll add those neo-Tychonic papers to the post. They'll be updated in a second.
Hey, Alan, did you see I finally got the other 2 papers that he wrote?
Yes, I did, and I have them.
Nice, yeah. So I guess Alan might drop you. It's called the Neo-Tychonian. I butcher it, but Neo-Tychonian, Newtonian. It's like Newtonian, Neo-Tychonian, Machian analysis. Neo-Tychonian, Newtonian, Machian analysis of planetary bodies or motion of planetary bodies, something like that. That's Luca Popov, published in the European Journal of Physics, and it just shows you the dynamic equivalence. But he wrote 2 subsequent papers, and as he went to turn those in to get published, it's like really laying out geocentrism. And they refused to publish it. They did not rebut it. They did not show it was wrong somehow. They just refused to publish it. But we got a hold of them finally, so pretty interesting.
Yeah, I guess I don't have anything more to say. Let's see. No, not really. So that's it. Thank you guys for all the data. I will analyze it, and like in 2 months or 1 month, because there's a lot of data, I will come here with a reply to all of that.
That's what's up, bro. Hey, Heavenly, do you have like a specific study like in the sciences, or are you just like doing this on your free time?
No, I am studying physics, and also I have a lot of things to do in the day, so that's why it's going to take a while.
Nice, bro. Dope field. Interested to see where you take it. I don't know. Do you have like a goal, like physicist, or the specific type of physicist?
Well, I wanted to study more about gravity and all of that. So that's why I wanted to see the alternative to gravity, so that I can actually work towards that. As a matter of fact, you can call the alternative that you're talking about gravity, just because it is explaining the natural tendency of things falling to the ground. So that would also count as gravity, not strictly as the kind of gravity that Newton described and Einstein described, but you can call that gravity.
True that, man. Yeah, gravity comes from gravitas, which means heavy, the fact that things have a weight. So yeah.
Now, can I just go ahead with it? My bad.
Well, I just want to point out that Nikola Tesla pretty succinctly covered this a long time ago, right? He said the idea that space has curvature is basically asinine, and for the simple fact alone that space cannot have properties, it's like saying something is acting on nothing. And the only way to explain the motion of the bodies observed in the sky is to acknowledge the indispensable role that a field of force akin to an ether plays, and that any attempt outside of this is a futile pursuit destined to oblivion. That is still the case to this day. Sacred good?
Yeah, there are some contradictions with saying that space is nothing, because nothing would be, you cannot basically define nothing, because you would be pointing out to a thing because you're giving properties to it. I have a different definition for space, so that you can solve basically that problem, which is the displacement of objects, which is not nothing, but the absence of one of those things, which is a thing, an object, which is a physical thing, not anything. Well, that basically solves most of the problems related to trying to assign something that is nothing any property. Like even saying that nothing has
you said the absence of the thing that was displaced, which is called a privation. So that means that its actual definition is dependent upon the existence of something else. So like a shadow is a privation. Like we have a name for a shadow, we treat it like a thing, whatever, but a shadow is a privation. It's nothing in and of itself. It's the absence of light, right? So like nothingness, zero, these are privations. Space is the same thing. It's the volume absent of matter. If there's a thing and it's just place and it's the area or volume that where the thing used to be, but now it's absent of that thing, it's a privation. It's defined as the absence of something else, which means it's nothing in and of itself, which means it's like literally nothing. It's just conceptual, right? This is the major conundrum that space-time has, and ether does not, because ether says no, there's something actual there. There's a physical medium, whereas the alternative does not say that. So
Well, you're not really saying that, well, as defining it as a privation, which would be the absence of physical things in this case, you're not really making an equivalence to nothing, because you're just denying one thing in particular, which would be physical objects. You're not making any proposition about any other thing, like location, which is not a physical object and is related to space. So
location is a conceptual description, though, bro, right? Like, can you hand me length? Can you hand me length?
Do you know how we define concepts?
Well, they're just abstract. They're just abstractions, right? So they're not real things. It's like, can you bend love?
Yeah, but do you know what abstractions are? Because they are derived from reality. That's
just like love. Love is a real experience. Freedom is an actual like experience or idea that we all understand and know to be actual, in the sense that you can be free or you cannot be free. You can be in what we call love. You can feel love, but they're just the way that we describe some type of experience. It's a concept. It's an idea, but I can't hand you love. It isn't real. It isn't actual. It isn't tangible. It isn't even physical. I can't bend it. I can't curve it. The only people that can bend freedom is the U.S. government run by Israel. Like, it's just a joke. Like, it's just conceptual, bro, right? It's called a reification fallacy. You know what that is, right?
Yeah. I have some problems with the reification fallacy because I subscribe to a different definition of abstraction. Because if you talk about abstraction as that which is not tangible, then if you haven't been to some place in particular in the entire world, then you cannot say that something in question is tangible, because you haven't tested the proposition. So that would therefore make it abstract. So it should be independent of tangibility, because there are things that we cannot touch in this moment, but they are still objects and not abstractions. So I would ask.
But someone could go touch it, and you could go touch it, and it can be physically verified. And it doesn't even require touch, right? It doesn't require literal tangibility. That's why I also said or physical, because like technically energy is physical, right? It's not material, it's not tangible, but it's physical, and it can have a physical interaction, like an interaction with the physical world. But like, if you're like talking about Russia, but you've never been to Russia, right? Well, Russia is a name of an actual geographical location that has tangibility. Just because you haven't been there, sure, it's an abstraction in that you haven't physically verified it yourself, but that's different than the fact that the idea that something that doesn't truly exist in all of physical reality can have physical properties. And this was even Einstein himself and like openly admitted this. This is why it's also funny, because what I found out is that all the people that believe in relativity never read Einstein. So as much as I dislike the guy, he was actually very blunt. He said, this is like the biggest issue. This is the biggest conundrum with my theory, is that space must have physical properties. But exactly how, I don't know. I don't know how to explain that. But if we don't have physical properties, then we have nothing against which to measure with measuring rods or clocks. And so it must be endowed with physical properties. But I don't really know how to explain how it is or what it is, because I'm removing all actual physicality from it. So like, Einstein straight up says, like, okay, I can't even wrap my mind around the idea, but it's the only way I can explain away the evidence. And now it's totally misrepresented, and you have people that have never read him be like, oh man, stupid flirt if you don't know what space-time is. You know what I'm saying? Like, well, Einstein said he didn't know what it was either. So
the powers that be then must have chose to left that part out when they assimilated his.
Yeah, all the way in 1938. The last thing. All the way in 1938. So this is like 30 years after relativity, right? 1938, Evolution of Physics by Einstein and Infeld. He talks about the ether, and he says, for when we say ether, we say nothing other than space must be endowed with physical properties, and in this sense, the ether must exist. In fact, relativity or space without ether, relativity without ether is unthinkable. And that the idea of ether has changed consistently throughout time, and that its existence or its story is by no means finished, but rather continued by relativity. So what he's saying is like, okay, we've had to completely change our understanding of the physical properties that the idea of space is endowed with, and I don't really know how to explain it to you, but that's what we're still on our journey to figure out what it means, right? And that was in 38. That was like towards the end of his little career, if you will. So I'm just saying, I think that's pretty important because Tesla was a literal genius, obviously, and he was predominantly autodidactic, and he pointed out immediately, this can't work because space is an idea, it's a concept. It can only have attributes. It cannot have properties. It's nothing in itself. It's like saying something's acting on nothing, right? And he also pointed out that due to the equal and opposite reaction in all of nature, that the curvature of space-time would straighten out, even if you could pretend that it could have physical properties, but it can't. And yeah, I'm just pointing out that in order to keep the heliocentric model, they had to go off into the world of paradox and reification. And that's a pretty good sign that your idea is wrong.
Yeah, I would like to see your definition of physicality, because physicality itself would be a concept, so you would be defining objects in terms of concepts. So I would like to see your definition of physicality to avoid that problem.
Yeah, interaction within the physical world, matter or energy. But we can continue this later.
There's a problem with that definition, which you probably have noticed, that you have used a derivation of the word physicality, which is physical. So
okay, interaction within the material world.
Yeah, but material is a synonym of physical.
Oh, no, material world is in the actual perceivable natural world. So interaction within the natural world. Okay.
Yes, but what is material has physical properties. So when you're saying that something is material and you are defining it based upon what is real, what is in the world, what we can perceive, you're talking about things that have physical properties. So you're defining something that is material based on physical properties, and you are going in a circle in this case.
No, I said any type of interaction that actually occurs within the natural world. So like if that isn't the case, right, then it is not going to be what we define as physical. And mind you, I actually hold to the idea that there is in fact something that is immaterial. It's an immaterial medium, right? I think there's an ether. The difference is I say it's actual and it's substantive, right? And thus being actual can have physical properties. So really this is going to get more philosophical, but it would be actual, and then you would define actual, and then you know, the point is that it's the actuality of it. Like space is not actual. Space is a description. It's length, width, breadth, height. It's like, okay, it's this tall, it's this wide, it's this long. I cannot hand you length or width. If I say there's a background medium and it's oscillating, well, you know, that's a real thing, right? That's an actual physical interaction. That's physical displacement. So that's the difference. It's a fundamental axiom that's different.
Yeah, but I cannot hand you an oscillation, even though it's physical.
Correct, because it's a description of the motion within a medium. So the important part actually is that you can't have an oscillation without a medium. You can't have, because I can't hand you a wave, but I can wave my hand. And if I see a wave in the pool, I can't pull the wave out, but I know that the pool is waving. So what's actually waving? It's the water, right? The water is moving. If I shake the sand off my towel on the beach and it waves, like, okay, well, it's the towel that's moving. It's waving. Wave is a verb. It's not a noun. It's an action. We see waving in vacuum chambers, right? We see electromagnetic waves, as people call them. We see this transverse motion, this waving. The fact that we see waving, right? Since you're correct, I can't hand you an oscillation. I can't hand you waving. That means there has to be something that is waving. There has to be a medium that is moving. And that is actually the most concise and precise way to prove the ether, just logically.
Yeah, you talk about a medium, but an oscillation is a type of order change. It does not necessitate that thing that is changing to be actual, to be physical. For example, you can have a field with numbers, and you just make those numbers change in such a way that the change can be described as an oscillation. So you can describe an oscillation in absence of something physical, because it refers to the notion of an ordered change. In that case, it would be a matter of using different definitions. In this case, you're probably using a definition that is related to the material things. So
no, I'm saying something immaterial, actually. I personally think that the ether is immaterial, but this is what I'm okay. Your set of field is math, and that's what like modern science says. And dude, if you're going to school to be a physicist or whatever, like you have an opportunity to kind of change the world, right? If you find out these major issues that are there, and instead of just kind of like going along with what they're saying, you go try to solve the problems, then you have a pretty good opportunity, right? And this is one of them. Right. This is one of the major problems that they have. So, I mean, I don't know. I would just encourage you to step back and consider like wiping the slate clean.
Yeah, but the reification fallacy is something very important, because that's basically being used to dismiss Einstein. So since it's going to be used to dismiss big area of physics apart from the empirical experiments of the ether that I am going to also go through, I want to examine all of those things related to the reification fallacy. And well, for that you have to define a concept, you have to define an object. I had a debate, well, I'm having actually a debate with Bill Gates about that. He has some crazy ideas. I found a lot of fallacies in his reasoning, but it's really difficult to actually define material, natural, because you're going to go in an infinite regress and you're going to need primitive notions. But it's really important to fixate on things related to logic, because we are actually using them to dismiss things. So therefore, we have to explore those.
Yeah, but reification fallacy is a well-known thing. It is a misplacing concreteness into an abstraction or an idea. It's just like saying bending love. If you say, I bent love, that'd be a reification fallacy. Love's a concept. It's an abstraction. Merely an abstraction can have physical properties. The point that I was making to you was you said that field was mathematical. That's what like mainstream scientism will say. So they'll say, for example, that the photon is the localized excitation of a photon field. You'd be like, okay, what's a photon field? And you'd be like, they'll just say, oh, it's the mathematical description of where the photon is. So it's like, oh, the photon is the localized excitation of the mathematical description of where the photon is. That makes no sense, right? And you can use a magnetic field to explain this, right? The magnetic field's a real physical thing. That isn't just math. So a field is an actual thing, which is actually, I would say magnetism is the one only true field, which is like a coherent, perpetual exchange of energy. And really magnetism seems to be the only thing that truly does that. So long story short, you couldn't just say that the magnetic field is just math. No, it's not, right? It's actually the coherent exchange. All right, look, this is a really deep conversation. I actually have to step away for a second. So we can talk some other time, or I'll pop back in a second.
Yeah, no problem.
So yeah, you say that Einstein...
Hold on, real quick. Okay. Just want to say that was a great build. And man, I could listen to this conversation over 100 times. Just from the approach, man, there's so much value. Let's drop a bomb for my man Heavenly.
Yeah, I don't like people memorizing things, like not actually putting any significant thought into them. That's why I value in maths, for example, that's something that we are mostly studying, to have proofs of every single formula and every single thing that we are seeing, because I really want to know the integrate details of the things. Because if you cannot explain it in a very in much detail, then you don't actually know what you're talking about. So it's really important to fixate over those things related to concepts, objects, and all of that, because it's related to the debate that we are having. So that's why we are going through all of those things.
Hey man, excuse me, I appreciate you being honest. The other thing I wanted to highlight right before y'all went into that back and forth was that it's just amazing, right? You know, you listen to Witsit on InfoWars. He's approaching a conversation with honesty. And then all the globe earthers on the timeline is just saying the same thing, right? Well, let me just say the anti-flat earth. Oh, Witsit said gravity's real. Witsit said gravity's real. Now we're having a conversation about the physics and not even, discussing that aspect of it. Heavenly says, hey, I understand what you mean when you talk about gravity, about the weight, and how, we're just really just, calculating emotion. And it's like, someone like Heavenly could sit there and be honest about that without even having to have like a whole, I don't know, dismantling of the conversation. And it's just honest. And just have you thinking, like, what is it about some of the anti-flat earthers where they can't approach the conversation like this? It almost have you thinking like all the globe earthers and all the anti-flat earthers all agree on the same thing. They all believe the same thing. And then you come into somebody like, talking to Heavenly, and then you get some honesty. And it's just such a breath of fresh air, man. I just want to highlight that. I'm trying to be more positive and highlight the approach, when it's apparent. So I appreciate that, bro.
Yeah, thank you. I like this way of debating in which we are not shouting at each other, and we are actually learning about the things that we are talking about. For example, we had the debates with Witsit related to more fundamental things. I also would like to debate more about science, because he has a different view from what I uphold. Because I not only think that science is related to cause and effect, but also it's related to descriptions. But that would be something for another day. The main problem why many people come just with no knowledge about the things that we are going to be discussing, for example, in these cases, is because in many occasions when they come here with knowledge from institutions, usually what institutions do, because they cannot handle you out every single thing, every single proof for everything that they are showing you, because if they were to do that, then you would learn adding and multiplication once you get to the age of 17 years. So there's obviously a problem with that, because we cannot see the proofs for everything that is taught to us. So we have to depend on we have to trust, basically. So when you just go with what you have been taught, you are not going to perform very well in debates, because you have to actually critically think and all that. So that's basically the core issue with what you were talking about.
Hey, man, right on. And yeah, we agree that you should always look at the other side of the argument so you can be well versed in the conversation. So again, man, just shout out to you. I would follow you, but you only got one tweet, bro. So
yeah, I just created the account.
That's what's up. I appreciate you joining Flat Earth Fridays for the first time. You're always welcome back. You got a mic here. I'll give you another hand clap. And yeah, man, keep on pulling up the Flat Earth Fridays. I'll pull up some of the other platforms when they have the conversations over in Ether Cause, Earth Awakenings. Whenever they go live, or Witsit School in the Globers or Globebusters and Globebusters Tech. You got the whole week on Smash. So looking forward to more conversation with you, bro. And I think that Amphibious wanted to jump in. I know Ralph had his hand up a little while earlier, but it's down now. So we'll jump to Amphibious.
Appreciate you, Sacred. So yeah, I just had a question. Now that we established the authenticity of Heavenly, I just wanted to know, if you want to share, you don't have to, but where you grew up, what country, and if you were publicly or homeschooled, what your early education was like for you to have this, kind of open mind approach.
I wouldn't like to share my location, but I can tell you some details. Well, we have a different approach to education, with some of the teachers here, because they actually try to teach you why things occur instead of saying that things occur. For example, I had a math teacher that was very fixated on every proof that he had to give for the things that he was talking about. For example, when we saw, I believe it was a theorem related to the sum of the angles of the triangle that equals 180 degrees in each triangle, for example. If we are talking about Euclidean geometry, obviously, not hyperbolic geometry or other types of geometry. If you change the fifth axiom, well, that's a tangent. But basically, he every time he taught us a topic in question, he asked us, do you think what I'm teaching you is true? And most people would say, yeah. Okay, explain me why. And no one could answer what he was talking about, and then he proceeded to prove basically everything that he was talking about. That's a very good approach.
Very cool to hear. Teachers should teach more like, hey, straw man my position, steel man my position. Do those types of things. Yeah, we're very lacking in a lot of the Western world when it comes to education. It's very sad. I appreciate your perspective. Thank you. I'm gonna land.
No problem. I am going to go have dinner because it's really late here. So I guess that this is I'm going to say bye now.
Well, enjoy your dinner, man. Make sure you use a flat plate and your table is stationary.
Yeah, bye.